Hello, everyone. It's good to be here, and it's good to have a small group. Simply because I really would like to keep this somewhat interactive. In other words, some of these things get to be a little bit heady, I think, when we're talking about ROI and calculations and stuff. And we want to be able to go a little bit deeper if we need to within the time we have. So feel free to raise your hand or drop something in the chat, or honestly unmute and say, "Excuse me," because there's only a few people. So we're going to cover a lot of things. I won't go over the whole list here, but the bottom line is we're going to look at an older model called Kirkpatrick, a little bit newer Phillips, and why that's important when we're trying to think about calculating return on investment on our learning. And then we're also going to look at why people get tripped up, what makes it hard. This should ring true to you. And look at how we can use a calculator to help us. And you actually will go over a calculator here today, and you'll have access to it today and going forward. And you don't need to join anything or give an email or anything. It's just on a website. So then after we look at the calculator, we'll look at some pitfalls to avoid when you're trying to use it. And then I think a really important part is how to communicate the results that the calculator gives you. One thing I want to underscore before we get going is calculating ROI is less about the ROI and more about how to produce really effective learning, how to get to really effective learning. And I think you'll see that as we go. All right. So this is the Kirkpatrick model. It has four steps, four levels in it, if you will. And what this slide is talking about is really that there is a decreasing number of people usage as you go through the levels in the Kirkpatrick model. You'll see as we go here. By the way, these statistics are from the Learning Training Industry magazine, and also Research Studies and Practitioners, and it's real current, so that's good. So level one is what I can't believe it's not 100%. You can see the slide says only 80% of the people do, which is about how do participants feel after going through a training. We do this with, satisfaction surveys, evaluations, what we call smile sheets. And of course, that is their reaction to the training. But 80% of the people who do training supposedly do this. Can't believe it's not 100%, but it's not. So you can understand that really tells about how people feel about the training. That doesn't really talk about the value or how it's going to impact our organization. Level two goes a little bit further, and we call it learning. And about approximately 50% of learning out there takes that extra step to do this. And this is about trying to figure out what participants actually learned. You can see tests, assessment, skill demonstration, for example. And that's better, right? Then level three, which is where we really would love to get to, only about 20% of the people do this, and that's looking at application of learning on the job. So to be able to understand that or to evaluate that, you'd have to do, as it says here, performance observation, behavior tracking of some sort. Now, I have to say that there's technology out there now that has made this easier. You would think this number would go up, that more people would be doing this, because we're seeing a lot of mini type trainings built right into people's workflow. And so you would think that is going to help this behavior number go up. And then level four, which is what everybody would love to get to, and I would say that is one of the reasons we do any kind of a learning program, is what is that? And don't worry about the word business. It could be any organizational impact, for profit, not for profit, doesn't matter. And the organizational results. So things like productivity or quality improvements or cost reductions. And this, of course, if we understood this, would help us better more confidently invest in the right things. And only about 10%, and I think it's probably lower, of the programs out there actually go to that level four. So why is that? What are those barriers? You can see the whole bulleted list at the bottom: time and resources for follow-up and measurement. One of the things that we're going to talk about later in the session today is the difficulty in isolating training, that learning program, the impact it has on the results we're trying to achieve versus other factors in the organization. How do you isolate it to say, well, training did that or development did that, and how important is that? Um, there's not a lot of uh, expertise or methodology or knowledge in how to do this out there, or it's not readily available in organizations. How do I go about this? The interesting thing is that paradox is that levels 3 and 4 in the Kirkpatrick model provide the most valuable insights, and yet we do them the least. And because this is what justifies, or maybe not even justifies, maybe helps us direct or target the funds that we have and the time that we have into effective programs. So this gap represents kind of a major missed opportunity for L&D if we don't understand these things. So that
So,
is the premise. Go ahead.
Chris, yeah. So I may be putting you on the spot, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question. For me, there are two types of training. So there's training how we do it, where we've identified a specific skill set. We are trying to build people's capacity to do their work in a better, new, different way. And then there's training like that we're in it right now for Metro, where we have to like, here's your safety training. Don't put an extension cord out where you can trip on it. Like, so there's the, I don't know, like legal protection trainings. Do you know if this research is on both types of training? Like, does it include the mandatory like insurance trainings, or is it just on the type of professional development that you and I work on for people?
It's a great question, Beth. I don't know. I'm going to make an assumption based on what I understand. My assumption will be that it includes both because the stuff that I read didn't distinguish. However, uh, you bring up a really good point because what we would call mandatory training, right? Compliance training, some of those things we have to do whether or not they we have to do them because of some regulation or something in our organization safety, for example, right? And so interestingly enough, we're less likely to look at those. And in fact, we should be more likely. As you know, I have a lot of clients in manufacturing, and safety is the biggest kind of training. And for years and years, decades, people never really measured safety training because they just had to do it. Nowadays, we measure it very extensively. So it went from compliance to no, this is something that it's not just about having to do it, we want to do it. So I don't know if my comments help, but I think that you could use what we're going to look at for both, in my opinion. So let's take a little bit further look at these. We just went over these, right? We said level 1 was reaction, level 2 is learning, 3 application, 4 results. So level 5 is where Jack Phillips added, and actually I think he and his wife together did this, added level 5. And that was where we try and get to a return on investment. In other words, we don't just stop at saying this is we actually go into it and attempt to measure, and we also say it's not we give ways to and tools to adjust our measurements because of the unique concerns, the unique challenges we run into in training. Like I mentioned the whole idea of, well, did this benefit really come from this training program, or did it come from something else? We call those isolation factors. So Phillips added that level 5. So the core or ROI formula that probably anybody in any industry would use is this: you take the benefits, you subtract the costs, and then you divide by the cost and multiply by 100. That's how we get this ROI. Don't worry about the adjusted benefits yet. I'll come back to that. That's ROI for anything. That's the core formula. So let's go from there. Here's some examples. So here's an example. Example 1, you have benefits of 200,000, but your costs are 210. You run the calculation and your ROI is negative 4.76%. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means for every $1 spent in that endeavor, you're losing $1.46, right? Now, it may be that it doesn't matter because you have to do it in your industry, right? But that's just gives you an example. And maybe when you look at it, you go, wait a second, could we do it better? Is there something we could do to improve that? Is there a cost we don't need or a benefit? So that's what I mentioned earlier is one of the things I want to emphasize today is this is about as much as how do I adjust my training? How do I better target my benefits, make it more effective, not just does it make money or not? Example two, you've got it's going to be a positive ROI. So every $1 you spend on training, $1.05 is returned. And then just to use some different numbers, these are the same calculation. Look at number three, which is a ROI of 71%. And that's because we're getting a $300,000 benefit out of $175 cost. Now you go, oh, that would be great if I knew this. How in the world do I get to these numbers, right? And that, of course, is the whole point. But I want to do that quick little review of what we mean by an ROI calculation. So we're going to dive into that level 4 because level 4 is where we get measurable business impacts. And any calculator needs to be able to take into consideration the business impacts. Going back to the last slide, you couldn't get that benefit number without it. Costs are pretty easy, right? But the benefits are tough. So the kinds of benefits that generally happen are productivity gains. So you've got some kind of a increased output, like 15% faster project completion. Quality, where your mistakes, your defect rates go down. Time reduction, we can do things faster decision making, faster order processing, faster scheduling, whatever that is. Cost reduction, which is, direct savings or, literally eliminating waste in our process. So our costs go down. And then revenue, and that, of course, is for the for-profit world. New sales, expanded markets, etc. So in general, these are the kind of the categories that our learning and development programs are going to go after. And you could probably come up with others, and it may be a combination of them. But I will say that the more of these sort of categories you go after, the more challenging it can be not only to be successful, but to actually calculate the benefits. But those are the typical. So in general, when you're trying to collect data for these things, right? How do I do this? How do I possibly go out and gather this kind of information to be able to determine what my benefits might be for a program that I'm running or a program that I want to build? Well, first of all, don't rely on single estimates. Triangulating data by using multiple sources and then using that as your base and then coming up with a different number based on those. Obviously involving stakeholders, getting input from managers and participants themselves who may be participants in the future training, for example. Absolutely documenting assumptions because you want to remember how you derived your numbers, your benefit numbers to put into a calculator. You want to understand that because you probably will adjust them as you go. Once you run a training program, you might start to see there's other benefits we didn't intend, and there's some benefits we're not hitting. So you want to make sure you document your assumptions. And then overall, be conservative. Better to underpromise and overdeliver. So those are kind of data collection things. So now I want to go back to that ROI adjustment. It said in our ROI calculation a few slides ago, it said in there adjusted benefits. And these 2 points are, I think, the most important point of the calculator we're going to look at today. And I think this is what gives your discussion with others, with your stakeholders, real professionalism and gives it real merit. So first of all is the confidence level. In my years in developing and being part of curriculum development, program development, one of the biggest pushbacks I got when trying to secure funds, not really raise them, but say, hey, this program's worth an investment from our budget. One of the biggest things was these two. First is confidence level. How confident are you that the benefits you work so hard to estimate are actually going to occur? And this gives us kind of a nice way to look at that. You can adjust these numbers, but you want to have your confidence level of like 90 to 100% if you actually have historical data about those estimates. And if you don't have actual data, but you have reasonable estimates based on similar programs, your confidence level may be in that 70 to 89%. Now, an educated guess with supporting evidence, which I think is where a lot of people fall, is that 50 to 69%. And then below 50% means highly speculative. Now, what do I mean by this percent? Well, as we're going to see in our calculator, you can adjust this confidence level so that you can say, hey, if we were more confident in our numbers, look what would happen with our ROI, right? And so you can adjust that and you can have that discussion with the people who you're presenting to say, this is why our confidence level is this, and here's how we can make it a little bit higher, or here's where we can make it more conservative. The default in the calculator I'm going to show you is 75%. So it's right in that reasonable estimates based on similar programs. The second thing that we want to be able to play with is the isolation factor. And I think this is even harder than the confidence level. The pushback I would give is when somebody would say, well, Christine, you and your team did a great job coming up with this. I love these benefits, but how will we know they're actually coming from training? Aren't we going to get those from X, Y, and Z as well? And the answer is probably yes. We will probably get benefits from other factors. How do we know that people that are improving their leadership skills, making more solid decisions, for example, are doing so because of our program? So this is another factor we want to be able to move around. Isolation is, unless we're talking about technical training, is really tough. In the soft skill training, leadership development, et cetera, it's harder. So you can see if we think that training is the primary driver, and we can back that up with a good reason we think that, then you're in that 80 to 100% isolation. If we think it's only a major contributor, 60 to 79%, and then of course training contributes alongside other factors, 40 to 59. But again, it's not that you should pinpoint exactly the truth here. What you're doing is being able to have a discussion with stakeholders, people who you're trying to convince, if you will, that this is a good use of training budgets and training time. And you can see how you can play with this factor. So these are really important, that we can have these conversations with data in order to get to the ROI. So put a pin in that for just a minute. I'm kind of building up to going into the calculator. There's another topic that I think is important, and that's the categories of costs. As you all know, there's one-time costs when you develop a learning program, and that's, the actual development. Maybe there's some setup and implementation that you need, like platform configuration or testing. And then there's the time that people are using to build the program, that initial training investment. Those costs are really important and must be included. There's also costs that are annual recurring costs, and it's important to keep these separate because they point to different things in the ROI. The annual recurring costs are things like, let's say you have a platform that you're using, so you need software, licenses or subscription. Let's say you have a facilitator that you hire from external, so you have training fees. Maybe there's venue costs depending on how your budget works. Then there's the actual expenses like workbooks or printed supplies or things like that. And then the time to the program management. Oh my gosh, it takes a lot of time and effort to coordinate and administer these programs. And then finally, there's the participant costs, and this one gets lost a lot. And that is the actual time that people go to your training, and when they could be doing something else to help the organization, salary, benefits, overhead, right? So these kind of cost categories become important when we look in the calculator. Now, I haven't seen anything in the chat, but I want to pause here to see if there's any questions before I keep going. I feel like I'm just like talking a mile a minute trying to get it all in. Anybody have questions? Have I lost anybody? We
I
all
don't have a
right?
question. I would maybe offer an example of these recurring costs. We have a program, they're called Educator Learning Circles, and essentially it's a opportunity for people to come together on a topic. And typically they have some kind of something that they're reacting to, right? Like a book or a series of websites or something. And, in terms of measuring the impact, part of the impact is creating these communities, right? So it's sort of a easy way to justify the existence of them, but also we're looking at the costs of them. And so this year, we're reacting to budget issues and looking for ways to cut down. And so, we were talking about the materials not necessarily being as impactful as their cost would support, right? And so
Mhm.
we're looking for OER, we're looking for, more websites. We trimmed the offering. Usually have like 6 or 7 that we suggest, and we trimmed 1 or 2 of them that use, books that we would have to buy. And so, in the next year, I'm looking at ways to kind of scale down the second bracket and maybe invest more in the first bracket in terms of making this program more cost effective. So that was just something that I was thinking about when you were talking about. It's not really a question, but
No, Andrew, that's great. And that's it points directly to what I said in the beginning, that this isn't just about getting at the ROI. It is about understanding the components of your learning program such that you can, um, when you have to react to constricting budgets, you know where to look,
right.
right? And you understand the tie to the benefits. So it's just really responsible for someone developing these programs to understand their own ROI. Even if you never present to someone, understanding this can help you in challenging times when you have to make adjustments. So I think it's a great comment. I thank you for it. All right. So there is some assumptions that the calculator work I'm going to show you has. I'm going to quickly go over these. Benefit decay. In other words, if you think about somebody, take a participant one, a particular person, they go through a learning program. And whatever benefits we want out of that person on the job, those benefits are going to decline year over year. In other words, the amount of benefit the organization gets in year one is probably different than in year two and in year three, et cetera. And so we built in a decay model here, as you can see. Um, there's also something about attributing cost to the current cohort. I'm going to actually skip that one. It's easier to show that in the calculation later. Benefits timing. Benefits, we assume that benefits begin immediately after the training is complete. And we do this in the calculator. That's an assumption that's in there, though it may be that it takes a little bit of time for those to show up. And then finally, the participant consistency, we assume that one participant is equal to the other. So we don't try and get into the idea that some people are going to benefit more than others. They're all the same, right? So these are just the assumptions we make in the calculator. So in our calculator, and not our calculator, the calculator we're going to go over is, I want you to understand that there's a dual or ROI approach. That we're going to give you the calculator gives you 2 different ROIs. They answer different questions. First is a program ROI, and it's answering the question, was the program investment worth it overall? That looks at multi-year benefits minus total first year costs. So the program ROI changes with how if you've said the benefit duration is going to be 5 years, your ROI is going to change if you change the benefit duration. So it's looking at the whole program. Operating ROI is different than that. This asks the question, how efficient is ongoing operation? So Andrew, the example you brought up sparked me here. You've already built it. It's already out there. You're asking the question, what's our operating ROI every year?
Yeah,
And this is
interesting.
one I think that answers that is it does not change with benefit duration. You're just looking at, if I run this year over year, what is that ROI? So we're going to give you both of those. The calculator will give you both of those. All right. One last example of the difference between these two is, I think of operating ROI like the miles per gallon that I get when I have a car, but my program ROI is the total value over my whole ownership of that car, a lifetime value metric. Those are the different things. All right. So here is the link you can go to. I'm going to actually go there myself and bring it up. You don't have to go there if you want, but this is your link, and I will put it in the chat before we get off the phone or off the call here. Experiencebuilder.com/resources. And then you're going to click on the evaluation paradox and training calculator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm actually going to reshare and go to that link, of which you will have that same access. And what you'll find here, you'll end up here. It talks about some of the things I've talked about. It actually gives you that same thing I put into into our slide deck. And if you scroll down, it gives you the learning experience ROI calculator. And you're going to see the Phillips level 4 results. Remember those ones we talked about: productivity gains, quality improvement, time reduction, that you can fill in. It gives you the confidence and isolation factors. And I'm going to show you how all this works. You can click on load an example just to see how it all works. You can also clear the data and add your own, but I'm going to click load so you can see how this works. So you would go through and do your benefits estimate, and put them in these categories. Honestly, the categories don't matter to the calculator. Whether you put in productivity gain or quality development, quality improvement, it doesn't matter. This is just for your own purpose, to say, hey, this is how we building this program think of it. But the calculator doesn't care where it goes. And then here's those two confidence factors I talked about. And there's actually 3. There's confidence level. So how confident are you in your benefit estimate? Remember, I told you it was going to default to 75%. So you can slide this. This is about how confident are you that you've got your benefit estimates correct. And in the previous slides, I said which ones were which. And actually, I don't know. I know somewhere else where you can get those. Then the isolation factor. What percent of the benefits can we actually attribute solely to this training? And of course, if you go all the way up to 100%, then your ROI is going to go up because you know for sure that this training is producing these benefits. But as you go down, your ROI will go down. So you can play with those. And then here's that benefit duration. So how many years do the trained participants continue creating benefits? And you get to change this. The longer they contribute, the longer they keep their learning keeps getting benefits, the higher your ROI is going to be, your program ROI. And then, of course, you have here where you can put your costs in. You put in development costs. So your one-time cost, development for setup and implementation. Again, the calculator doesn't care about whether you put it here or here. It does care about whether you put it in one-time costs versus annual recurring. Then you have your participant one-time costs. So this is your total hours each participant spends in training. And you can put an average hourly rate in there. And then how many participants, number of people you expect to train. And then finally at the bottom, these are those annual recurring costs that we went over: platform, facilitator, materials, etc. So you're kind of building this stuff on the left-hand side of the calculator. And then on the right, it's going to total up your one-time costs and your annual recurring costs so that you get your first year total costs. And then it's going to look at your total benefits, adjusted benefits. Adjusted benefits are about, you put your benefits in here, but what confidence level? So watch this adjusted benefit. When I bring my confidence level up, it goes up. When I bring my confidence level down, it goes down because it's just redoing the math, right? And so wherever your confidence and isolation factors are set is what's driving these numbers. So in this particular case, your program has a 60% ROI. This is very, very good. Your operating ROI is 120, your net operating benefits, and your payback period, if you will. I also like this thing at the bottom here. This tells you that it's excellent, right? It's outstanding. It shows you, gives it in sort of English. First year, for every $1 invested, you receive $1.61 back. But future years, when those one-time costs have been already absorbed, every $1 is going to give you 2.21 back. And then what you can do is you can download a PDF report of this or export it to a CSV. It does also give you a little bit more information on the Phillips ROI. And you can do this all day long. The only thing you can't do is you can't save it because it doesn't know who you are. So you got to download it. The other thing is at the bottom here, there's a download our Phillips ROI calculator user guide. This is extremely detailed. And so if you really go, well, I went to this webinar, I don't remember all the things they said, you download this and it has all the details in it you would need to talk to somebody in your organization about your calculation. So that calculator the user guide combined with the calculator is pretty much what you'll need to try and do this. Now I'm going to pause here again before I go back to the slides and finish them out. Questions, comments from anyone? I don't see anything in the chat. Are we okay? All right. Then I'm going to, while I'm here, I'm going to take this link and put it in the chat for everyone. And then I'm going to stop this share and go back and just get back to the presentation. All right. So some benchmarks, right? I mean, and this is very subjective, but if you have a 25% ROI or above program ROI, this is an excellent business case, in my opinion, or in not just mine, but this is an excellent business case. But I can't tell you in your organization, I can't tell you whether or not that would be true. Up to 20% is still positive. Whoops, sorry about that. Is still positive, but you could try and look for optimization opportunities by digging deeper into your numbers, right? And the negative, of course, you want to really review that program design and the benefit assumptions. And it might be that it is a mandatory thing. It has to be done. And now you know what your ROI is. You have the reality of it, but can you turn that into something that is more beneficial? And then you've got the operating ROI. 50% plus is outstanding. So the top three here are about program ROI. That bottom one is about operating ROI. Below 25%, you want to consider program improvements is a good way to look at it. All right. Common pitfalls. Being over optimistic about benefits. If you can use historical data and be conservative in your projections, they won't seem too good to be true. And if they're too good to be true, they probably are too good to be true. So be careful about that. Incomplete cost accounting. Don't forget hidden costs. Now, some organizations absolutely do not want to include participant time. And I understand that. They look at it more as we're the organization. We get to tell people to some extent where we want them to spend their time so we can make this happen. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, when you're talking about quantifying participant time right into a number so that it can be plugged in, you're talking about like their hourly rate, or is that generally the
Yeah, good
okay,
question. I've seen it done a couple different ways. If you have a target group and you know who's in that target group and you know the range of their rate, you could use their hourly rate, or you could do a fully loaded FTE, that you
oh,
usually
sure, interesting.
organizations have that. If it could, the more diverse your population is that's going to go through the training, the more difficult this is. So one thing I've seen done is I've seen people say, hey, we are targeting people in the executive ranks for this leadership development, and they've come up with one number. We're targeting people in the director ranks, and they get these different numbers, and then they make them proportional to each other to come up
Sure,
with
to the participant
or
group.
you also could run the ROI three different ways, if you will, but you do need to put some thought into that. It's a good question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. And
So,
then,
Christine,
yeah.
one of the things that research says is that providing training and professional development helps you retain employees. And so there's all kinds of information out there on how much it costs to replace
Yes.
somebody if they depart. Was there a place to put that in? Do you put like, well, we may lose one employee or we may lose five, or is that a
No,
separate conversation?
no, I think it's a spot on conversation. How would I look at that? Most organizations have some level of information about their quote unquote turnover. And they're in industries where the cost of finding a new person is knowable, especially with today's world and the advanced querying that we can do, right? Of course, if you're going to use AI or something, check your sources. But absolutely, I think these are knowable things, and I would build them in. How I would build them in is to say, hey, especially in those soft skills, we have X number of people in our talent pool who this training is designed for. And those positions tend to leave organizations at this rate, right? And this is how much it costs us. I mean, you can build that. And when you build that, then you put that into the benefit calculator for sure. Yeah. I think it's a great, I mean, engagement and holding on to employees, retention, like the word didn't come to, are really at the heart of a lot of leadership training.
Thank you.
Yes, just make sure you document your assumptions and how you got to your numbers so that you can change them over time. Don't ignore the confidence factors. It is unrealistic to say that you're going to have 100% confidence in isolation, even though it drives your ROI way up. The reason those are there are to make your discussion with others more professional, not less professional, right? And so, and it's, I like engaging people in the conversation. So if you're working with someone, and specifically had a client, I didn't have this tool then, but I remember the conversation, like it was yesterday. The pushback was, we are doing so much to drive this particular metric in our organization. How in the world can we make sure that your program's doing it? And where we ended up going after discussion, because we were like, well, do we know how many things are trying to drive it? And could we create a pie chart that said, hey, X%, we need to drive it to this number. X% is going to come from this group, this program, this factor. And we did that. And at the very least, it got people talking about the confidence of who was impacting these metrics. That is a super healthy conversation to have. Yeah. And then single point estimates. When you use this calculator, how I would use it in your shoes, I would do different scenarios and save them off. Do the set the PDF out to show how this works. I even had somebody recently tell me that they put the calculator up on a projector and walked people through it, and they together played with it. I think that's fabulous. All right, so those are the pitfalls. Now, communicating results, I've already alluded to this a little bit. If you're looking at executive leadership, so the highest levels of your organization, and I think probably all of us know these kinds of things already, you should lead with the bottom ROI and the payback period if you can. But then make sure you include the conservative assumptions and risk factors, and then emphasize that Phillips methodology credibility. And what I mean by Phillips is this idea of the confidence and isolation factors. Emphasize that that's been put in it. If people want to know more, then you can dive into what you set those at. But at an executive level, that's where I would start. If you're looking at training teams or business or stakeholders that you are creating leadership, or excuse me, programs for them, for their businesses, you're in an internal role. Focus on continuous improvement opportunities. In other words, your team has efficiency as a metric in all of your processes. Here's how we can continually improve their efficiency, right? Here's the kinds of training we can do that particularly drive that metric you're going after. So you can get really specific when you're dealing with very specific teams. And then to participants, these are the actual learners themselves, show how their performance contributes to results. I really love this idea. And I think we all probably do this in training. Go ahead, Brian. I didn't see your hand. Let me pause there. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just giving you some clapping hands because I really think this is an amazing slide, honestly.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I thought you had your hand up.
Nope.
Okay, well, thank you for that. But to participants, when you're, Beth mentioned, I do a lot of facilitation and training. I used to do more than I do now, but I can tell you that I felt like it was really effective when I was in that role to say to the people in the group, if you do these things, if you put to practice the concepts we're talking about here, here is how it helps yourself, your team, your department, your organization, and then asking, how do you think it helps? So that connecting to participants and then connecting it to their individual development and how that that gets to organizational success. I think this can be really motivating in a learning myself. I don't know if it's only motivating at the moment or in it fades. I don't know, but I think it's a really important thing to think about. And a really creative way to do this is to build it into your training, right? How will you use this? I've seen Beth do this wonderfully at Metro State. How are you going to put this to use? Let's do it right now, that kind of a thing. All right, so key takeaways. Our takeaways, again, as I started to say, it's not just to calculate ROI, but it's to create programs that are going to deliver something sustainable. We can't do this analysis if we don't understand what we're trying to accomplish. And that alone is important. Like what needles in the organization are we actually trying to move? And if we understand that and we start sort of trying to use the calculator to figure out how we're going to do that, it actually becomes part of a building tool as much as it does a trying to calculate what the ROI is. Building compelling business cases, using the things that this calculator does is it makes sure we're building compelling business cases so that we are developing the right programs. It helps us make data-driven decisions. In other words, we need to scale this learning program back to cut down our operating costs. Where should we scale it back? Like what parts of the program are driving what benefits? So you can make data-driven decisions. I think it demonstrates accountability, not just for the people who are designing and developing, but also for the managers or the leadership team that's potentially okaying the investment. It drives that, and it also drives continuous improvement. If you can find a way to measure once in a while on an ongoing basis, you can see whether it's losing its that program is losing its effectiveness, its efficacy is going down for whatever reason, and you can look back at your model to say, well, how would we adjust this to keep it fresh, if you will? All right, I think that is the last. So I'm going to stop this share and open it up for questions and comments.
Andrew had put in the chat about communicating value to participants to improve the response rate of satisfaction on surveys. And you had said that's kind of like one measurement in that for this, but that we really want ongoing effect. Now, when we do training with an organization, like 6 months or a year down the line, we're not really connected to them necessarily anymore. Our training agreement has come to an end, but what, besides just doing the satisfaction survey right after the training, if I'm going to start using the ROI calculator, what else am I doing to get beyond that initial feeling of whether or not I like the training?
I got to make sure I understand your question. You're trying to say, what can I, as someone who can change the design, do?
What can I, as the person who sponsored the training for the organization and said, we should do this, beyond that initial satisfaction rating, how can I pull out the ROI, I guess, evidence of ROI?
All right. I mean, I think I understand, Beth. I'm hearing two things I'll comment on. Tell me if I've got this. So first of all, one, and I don't know where I saw this, so I'm going to quote something that I don't even remember where it came from, but I found it to be true. And that is that one of the biggest indicators of whether or not someone who's gone through some kind of a learning program will actually apply what they learned. There was two things. One is they believe they can. Self-efficacy, right? We know that one. And that is about, so if we want that to go up, we want to build more hands-on things to raise confidence during training. But the second one is that they know that their manager has them there for a particular reason. And that then when they come out, there's an expectation that they behave differently. And I don't mean behave differently as in you were behaving poorly. No, I mean just that they put it to use. So one of the things that a sponsor can do is to say, this is what's going to change when you're done with training. This is how you will implement. I hope that answers your question, but that drives ROI. One, because it shows that there's an expectation, but two, it tells them how.
Well, that was super interesting, and I appreciate that. But I guess what I'm also getting at is, so we do an evaluation before they even leave training or right after they leave
Yeah.
training. But what am I doing 6 months down the line or 8 months? Not me personally as the training provider, but me as the person who said to my organization, we really need to do this training. What can I do further down the line to pull out evidence of behavioral change?
I think I understand you more. So let me go back to this, because your question is actually the whole kind of our whole point. So when we get back to here, the results data, the benefits data that you can put in your ROI are these things, right? So if you're trying to estimate how your training in the future will actually improve quality, for example, then you better have a way that you're going to measure that in the future. So you're predicting it. So to your point, you would want to say, we're going to know if we're doing this by measuring every year or every 6 months. And here's how we're going to do that. And you would want to have that. And, a lot of people shy away from wanting to do this because they unfortunately think it has to be super scientific. If you look at this whole program, except for the actual cost, it's very subjective. Subjective is okay. We're just trying to do the best we can to understand it. So you would want to come up with a way that periodically you were going to measure those things. And you would want to do that. You would want to help people on looking at your ROI case. You would want to be able to tell them how you plan to do that and what that looks like. Yeah.
Thank you.
Others, of course, others. I have a quick example on that question, Beth. I worked with an organization. I know this is manufacturing, and probably a lot of people aren't on the call from that, but the industry doesn't really matter here. They had really high hopes when we went into a training that they were going to be able, they had a particular metric they were using in all of their manufacturing facilities, and it rolled up to regions and to the globe. And they had this metric, and they really believed that a training we were doing was going to be able to impact that metric. And at that time, we didn't have this calculator, but we thought it had a pretty direct impact. But when we asked the question, how will we measure it? We decided we would measure it by literally talking to participants each year, and ask them how they applied it and their managers. And it wasn't scientific, but it allowed us to say, yes, we know it is impacting. And then from that, and they did that for about 2 years. And then they kind of said, now we understand it. And they quit asking those questions. And they just attributed this particular training program to moving this particular needle, if you will. But the point is, it was super subjective. It was discussions with people. But it gave them confidence that what they did was working, if you will. All right. Other questions? Brian, I'm looking at the chart at the chat. In the business case, sometimes we do a train the trainer scenario to gauge their learnings and expose gaps. Yes. Maybe not the most cut. Yes. I think
Yeah,
what you're getting
I don't
at,
know. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know where that would totally fit into the ROI calculation, but sometimes it can expose gaps.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is you're
Yeah.
looking for a participant to try and
Yes.
train. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, we know that teachbacks during training
Yep.
make efficacy go up, right? And you can see the lights coming on. So I think it's
For
a really
sure.
good point. I think it's a really good
Well,
point.
what I did was also refresh.
All right.
All right. Well, I think we're about 2 minutes before the end. So Beth, I'm going to put it back in your hands in case you have anything else you want to do. But
Now, I was just gonna say thank people for participating, and I really small number today, but high engagement.
yeah,
So I really appreciate how engaged everybody was in the discussion. It makes the learning so much more rich. And then just remind people that if they enjoyed you as a facilitator today, Christine is our instructor for the Leading Teams Through Change. And so if that is a skill set, an ROI possibility for your organization to go ahead and take a look at signing up for that or talking to us about bringing Christine to your organization to do that training. So
that is, that is an awesome workshop. Not because of me, but because of the content. It is. I'm just saying
yeah,
it is. I can say it confidently because of past participants, right? But I would love to see more people there. It'd be great.
yeah. So, all right. Um,
All right, everyone, you're welcome. Good to see you.